Hey guys, welcome to Mild Moments History. Tonight, we're not chasing shadows. We're watching how they breathe and how they wait just outside the glow of a London gas lamp. This is not a tale about murder. It's about the quiet between footsteps, the pause before a scream, and the way soft light makes even horror look gentle. If this kind of storytelling helps you unwind, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if it truly brings you peace. So now, dim the lights, let the rain fall on cobblestones, and listen, not for what's loud, but for what never raised its voice. You're not alone, but you might be the only one who sees him just before the flame flickers out. You open your eyes to a sound so soft, you wonder if it's real. Not a scream, not a shout, just the faint scrape of something dragged over wet cobblestone. The air tastes like ash and last night's gin. It clings to your coat, settles in your lungs. You're in Whitechapel. October 1888, a place where light only reaches your knees. And darkness always knows where to wait. People don't move to Whitechapel. They end up here. When they've run out of anywhere else to go. Women sleep against crates. Children play with rats like you'd play with a puppy. Men only show up after sunset like daylight is a risk they can't afford. You hear it 1 penny, standing room only, no mattress, no blanket, just the right to not lie in the gutter. And beneath the yellow gas lamps, the kind that flicker with every cough of wind, shadows move quicker than the people they belong to. No one turns to look. Because in this part of London, it's safer not to. A woman rushes past, mud on her hem. She doesn't look back. But you see it, a quick glance over her shoulder. Then another. Then once more. Right before she stops beneath a lit window. Not to knock. Not to ask for help. Just to stand there. As if the light itself might notice if she disappeared. In Whitechapel, people don't scream when they're robbed. They don't scream when they find a body. Screaming is expensive and dangerous. One constable said he once chased a man who ran out of an alley. But when he turned into that alley, there was no man, only a woman's shoe, and the strange scent of something removed. That's when they started calling him Jack. Not a name, just a sound to point at what no one wanted to say aloud. At first, it was rumors. Then came the letters. Then came the real blood. London has always known violence, but this felt quieter. And that made it worse. In a small tavern near Hanbury Street, a man sips his ale and smiles. This time, he took the uterus. Then downs the rest of his drink, like he's discussing fox hunting. No one flinches. No one asks, who is he? Because asking makes him real. Outside, the lamps feel weaker. A bowler hat lies abandoned on the steps. You see it, but don't pick it up. Because whoever dropped it probably didn't want to come back. Near the corner, an old woman lights a candle. She says, "Gaslight's too bright." It makes you visible. Then points at a bucket near her door. If the blood runs, it always ends up here. You begin to notice everything here is done for a reason. Why people don't walk in pairs. Why every boarding house leaves its back door unlatched. Why most of the killings happen just where the light begins, but never quite reaches. And then, one morning the headline reads, "Ripped." Not sensational, just true. Because the body wasn't cut, it was torn. Jack left no footprints, but he changed how people walked. They checked over their shoulders. They watched their own shadows to make sure they were still there. They tiptoed into their own homes, just in case someone had already been waiting. Whitechapel knew poverty. It knew filth. It knew death. But it had never known a light. That couldn't save anyone. You don't see him at first. You just notice the light shift. It's late, later than it should be. Your hands are sore from scrubbing stone steps. Your apron is wet at the hem. And your back aches in that dull, resigned way that means this is normal. You're a street sweeper. Not the kind with a uniform, just someone the city lets sweep, in exchange for warmth. Tonight, The warmth didn't come, so you keep sweeping. The alley off Buck's Row is narrow. Too narrow for a cart, too forgotten for a name, but it's yours. Every night, you pass the same patch of soot, the same pile of orange peels, the same iron drain with a scent that never quite dries. You hum while you work, not a tune, just a note low and steady like a way to stay here. The gas lamp overhead sputters. You glance up only for a moment, and that's when the shape moves. Not fast, not loud, but sudden enough that the light disappears for half a second, as if someone walked right through it. Your first instinct isn't fear. It's confusion, because nothing should be here. No footsteps, no carriage, just you, the broom, and the light. You pause. Let the silence swell a little too long. Then sweep again. Slower now. There's a rhythm to cleaning a beat. Left, right, scrape, left, right, pause. Tonight, you find yourself pausing more than usual. You reach the end of the alley and turn, expecting to see nothing. But instead, the lamp above casts a faint outline against the wall, like someone had been standing there and just stepped away. You stare, not sure why. There's nothing there now, but the wall feels warmer where the light was blocked, and the air has that heaviness like breath after it's held too long. Someone was here, or maybe still is. You move to leave, but your broom catches something soft. You look down. A glove. Small, worn, the kind women wear to keep the soot off their fingers. You pick it up. It's damp, but not with water. Your thumb runs along the stitching. A name is sewn into the lining, but only the first two letters remain, M.A. You hear it then. Not a voice, not a scream, just the faintest sound like fabric dragging along stone. And the smell, it's not blood, it's sharper, like iron left too long in the rain. You don't move. The lamp above you flickers again, this time longer. You look up, and for the briefest moment you see it. Not a man, not a monster, just a coat, a long black coat, moving at the edge of the light, just far enough away to disappear into fog. You want to follow, or maybe you don't. Either way, your feet don't move. You hold the glove tight, as if it matters. Blah. The silence returns. It's heavier now. You sweep a little faster, just to make a sound, and behind you, the gaslight steadies again, as if nothing ever passed. It's still damp when she finds it. The laundress doesn't scream. She's too tired for that. And the yard is too quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like it's listening. She just stands there, one foot still inside the threshold, the other hovering over the step, because something is hanging from the nail beside her laundry shed, and it shouldn't be. It's a skirt, long, cheap, coarse wool, city-made. The hem is torn not by wear, but by force, and the color used to be gray. Now it's rusted dark, from the waist down, heavy with something that dried too fast. She looks around. Nothing. Not even wind. The sky is that pale, dead kind of dawn, the kind that never turns gold. She reaches out, almost reluctant, and touches it. Still cold, still wet, still real. It wasn't there when she closed up. She's sure of that. Last night, she swept the stoop twice habit, and the nail was bare. She had meant to hang her apron there in the morning. Instead, this. She doesn't call for help. Not yet. In this part of town, calling out invites more trouble than silence. So she lifts the skirt, gently both hands, like a ritual, and folds it into a basin. The dark stains smear against the metal. She tries to rinse it. The water turns red, then brown, then back to clear. But the smell clings, earthy, metallic, and faintly sweet like something rotting in sugar. She doesn't recognize the skirt, but she recognizes the stitching near the pocket. It's crooked, clumsy, the kind of mend a woman does for herself when she can't afford another seamstress. She's seen that mend before. On Mary's coat, the one she wore when it rained. Mary, the girl who sometimes dropped off socks to soak overnight. The one who paid with tea, not coin. The one who always said thank you even when she was crying. The laundress sits. The basin rests beside her. The sky hasn't brightened. The streets are still empty, but she knows someone is already walking toward the police station. She should go. She should report it. She should say, "There's blood." But that word feels too small. She waits another moment, then stands, apron still clean, and steps into the street. As she passes each doorway, she wonders, did anyone see it being hung? Did anyone hear footsteps? Did the skirt cry out? Once. At the corner, she stops. There's a smear of brown across the stones, like someone dragged something heavy. But the rain has tried to erase it. She bends down, touches it, then wipes her fingers on the inside of her apron, where no one will notice. The constable at the post is young. Too young for this. He listens quietly, then follows her back to the shed. She shows him the basin. He doesn't speak, but his hand, the one not holding the notebook, tightens at the knuckles. He asks, "Do you know who it belonged to?" She doesn't answer, not with words, just a slight nod. Later that day, someone will knock at her door. They'll ask for the skirt. They'll take it with metal tongs. They'll say things like evidence and relevant item. They'll wrap it in brown cloth and forget to thank her. But the laundress will still remember the shape of it. How it hung crooked, like it had given up holding itself up. And for nights after, when she passes that nail, she will never hang her apron there again. The ink is still wet. He didn't expect that. He thought it would be cold. Like most things at the post desk in the East End, wrinkled telegrams, requests for overdue pensions, love letters no one dared sign. But this one, it sticks to his fingertips. Not the outside, the paper is dry, crisp even. But the seal, red, smeared, with a kind of oily shine, gives under his thumb like it wasn't quite ready to be touched. It has no address, just 3 words, in blocky, jittering script. "Dear Boss Reed, the boy is only 17. He sorts mail for tea money. He shouldn't be the one holding this." But it was slipped through the back grate, not the front slot. And when he asked if anyone had seen who left it, they just shook their heads. Not no. Just don't ask. He sets it aside, finishes sorting the morning load, tries to forget the way the paper had curled at the corners, like it had been waiting. But the letter stays. And so does the feeling. Like something in the room is leaning forward. By noon, the room is empty, except him and the envelope. He thinks, if I don't open it, someone else will. And that thought makes him reach for it. He tears slowly, no rush, because something about it feels like a dare. Inside a single sheet, no greeting, no signature, just lines crooked, uneven, written as if the hand couldn't stop shaking or laughing. "I keep hearing they'll catch me soon. Good luck to them. I love the work. It's too quiet now. I'll start again. Maybe next time I'll clip her ears." He doesn't breathe. Not because he's scared, but because something in those words feels playful. And play, when paired with death, is the most terrifying thing of all. At the bottom, a postscript. "Catch me if you can. Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." He stares at the name, not because it's shocking, but because it's the first time anyone signed it. All the whispers, the papers, the neighbors who crossed the street, they had all called him that, but no one knew where the name came from. Until now. He places the letter on the desk, but it slides as if pushed by breath that isn't his. He takes it to the inspector. The man reads it twice, then sets it down. Says nothing. The letter stays there for hours, unread by others, unclaimed, unwanted, until someone finally says, "We have to publish it. Let the people see what kind of man we're dealing with." The boy wants to ask, what if that's exactly what he wants? But he doesn't. He just leaves the room, walks out into the cold, and throws up behind the alley bin. Later that week, the newspapers run the letter. People laugh. They think it's fake. A prank. But then, the next body appears, and her ears are gone. She remembers the way it clicked. Not loud, not forced, just unfinished. The latch didn't catch. It almost did, but not quite. And that's what stayed with her. Mrs. Darrow had run the boarding house for 27 years. She could tell the difference between a drunk tenant and a dangerous one by the way they touched the stair rail. But Annie had been neither. That night, she left early. Said she was meeting someone. Said it wouldn't be long. Just for a bit. She smiled, pulling the scarf tighter around her neck, as if it could protect her from the cold or from whatever waited at the end of Commercial Street. Mrs. Darrow watched her go. From the top landing, Annie always looked over her shoulder and waved. But not that night. She didn't wave. She just kept walking. The front door swung shut behind her. Mrs. Darrow waited to hear it click. She always listened for that. A clean sound, a sign the house was sealed. But instead, it caught for a second, then bounced, then rested there, ajar. It stayed that way. For hours. Mrs. Darrow didn't fix it. She thought Annie would be back soon. She always was, even when she came home with bruises. Even when she cried in the washroom. Even when she owed rent. Annie always came back. Until she didn't. The next morning, Mrs. Darrow made tea. 1 cup, then another. She left Annie's on the stove, just in case. The milk soured by noon. By dusk, someone knocked. A man in a thick coat, eyes too tired to blink. He didn't sit. He didn't explain. He just asked, "Did she leave last night?" Mrs. Darrow nodded. "Did she say where she was going?" She hesitated, then whispered, "She said he promised to be gentle this time." The man flinched, not at the words, at the word this. He asked to see her room. Mrs. Darrow led him upstairs. Every step creaked, but not loud enough to fill the silence. Annie's bed was still made. The pillow still held the shape of her head. The window was closed, but there was something in the air like a smell trying not to be noticed. The man left without taking notes, and Annie didn't come home that night, or the next. Then, the papers printed her name. Only the first. They always left off the rest, as if that made the story less personal. They didn't mention the door, the one that never fully closed. They didn't say how Mrs. Darrow stood at it for days, hand resting on the edge, waiting for anyone to push it open again. Eventually, she nailed it shut, not out of fear, but out of guilt, because she should have gone after her, should have shouted, should have fixed the latch, should have said, "Come back when the lamp is lit." But she didn't. She just listened. And when there was no sound, she told herself that meant Annie was safe. That door never opened again. But even years later, when the house had new tenants, new locks, and no memory of Annie, Mrs. Darrow still left the hallway light on, just in case someone decided to wave this time. He always walked the same route. Same boots, same time, same silence. The fog was thicker that morning. Not the kind that lifts when the sun breaks through, but the kind that lingers. The kind that muffles even the crows. Thomas, the night watchman, didn't mind. He liked fog. It made the world smaller, softer. Usually, by the time he reached Dutfield's yard, the sky had started to lighten. But that morning, there was no sky, just gray and quiet. He turned the corner, then stopped. Footprints, a trail of them, clearer than they should have been. They led from the alley's mouth, inward, deep, well pressed into the damp stone. But what struck him wasn't their shape, it was their stillness. They ended halfway through the yard. No turn, no stagger, just stopped. Thomas stepped forward, slowly. The fog closed behind him. He looked around. No body, no coat, no blood, but something was there. Not visible, but felt like air that's been breathed by someone else. He knelt beside the last print. His fingers hovered above it, close enough to feel the cold rising from the stone. Still fresh. Something had stood here, waited here, and left without walking away. He stood, took 2 steps back. Then he saw it, just at the base of the wall, barely noticeable a glint, something metallic. He moved closer, crouched again. A button! Brass? Flat, with a thread of maroon still hanging from the eye. He picked it up, held it in his palm. It was warm. That's what unsettled him most. The button should have been cold, but it wasn't. And suddenly, neither was the air. He looked up, and for just a moment, he saw a shape through the fog, a silhouette, still, facing him, not moving. He blinked, and it was gone. Not walked away, not turned, just no longer there. He didn't tell anyone at first. What was there to tell? I found footprints that didn't leave, a button that wasn't cold, and a shadow that didn't move. Instead, he handed the button to the constable. Didn't say where he found it. Didn't say why his hands were still shaking. That night, he took a different route. Then another. But the next morning, the fog was always there. And sometimes, so were the prints. Just one set, just standing still. Waiting. The man didn't give a name. Just measurements. Crisp. Exact. Spoken like someone who'd recited them many times or taken them from someone else. The tailor didn't ask questions. Not at first. He was used to odd requests. Men in Whitechapel often came in after dark, looking for coats long enough to hide things, but light enough to run in. But this man, he was different. Polite, neat, hands clean, boots too clean. He brought his own fabric, a deep black wool, finer than most could afford in that district. It had a smell, not unpleasant, but strange, like cloves and smoke and something faintly chemical. The tailor took the cloth anyway. 3 days, he said. Come back Friday. We'll do a fitting. The man nodded. No smile. No coin. Just I'll return. And he left. No sound. Not even the jingle of the bell on the door. The tailor worked late that week. Something about the coat felt important. It was simple. No lining. No extra buttons. But it flowed in a way that felt purposeful, like it wasn't just meant to be worn, but to move. By Friday, the coat was ready, pressed, waiting on the rack. But the man never came. Not that day. Not the next. Not ever. The tailor waited a week, then 2. He thought about selling the coat, but every time he reached for it, his hand hesitated. It was too quiet, too still. Eventually, he moved it to the back, covered it in muslin, tried to forget. But the memory stayed. Because the same week the man didn't return, the papers screamed louder than usual. Another woman. This one left. Differently. No blood trail, no screams. Just found. And something about the description, a long, clean slit through the bodice, reminded him of the shears he'd used that Tuesday. How easily the wool had parted. How the thread didn't resist. One night, unable to sleep, he went to the shop, unlocked the door, lit the lamp. He pulled the coat from the back. It was cold, not in a normal way, but in the way a room feels after someone's left it, as if the air had been holding its breath the whole time. He checked the pockets. Empty. Checked the sleeves. Fine. But at the hem, he found it. A single thread. Red. Not from the wool. He didn't touch it. Just stared. The next morning, he gave the coat to the police. They thanked him, took it, said they'd look into it, but no one came back. Weeks passed, then months. Then another knock. A different man? Different voice? But the same request. I need a coat. Black. Long. Light. This time, the tailor said no, and locked the door behind him before the man could ask why. The girl didn't sleep much. She wasn't supposed to be there, but the baker let her stay sometimes if she promised not to talk, and not to steal from the sugar bin. So she curled beneath the stairs, under a sack of old flour, with a borrowed blanket that still smelled like yeast and ash. It was enough. But that night, she woke to something sharp. Not a sound. Not at first. Just a feeling like air gone brittle. Then she heard it. A cat. Not yowling, not fighting. Screaming. The kind of sound you don't expect from something alive. Thin, piercing, as if the air itself was being torn. She scrambled to the window, the one just above the alley. The glass was cracked in the corner, but clear enough to see through. Fog, street lamp, silence, then motion. A tail disappeared into the dark, long, black, fluffed in terror. The scream still echoed against the stone walls. She pressed closer, and then she saw him. Not clearly, just enough. A man, standing still. Hat tilted, face obscured by the way the gaslight haloed around his shoulders, as if the light refused to touch him. Docs. He didn't move, didn't look up, but she felt it, like he knew she was watching. She ducked down, heart pounding, blanket pressed over her mouth. Minutes passed, or maybe just seconds. Then, footsteps, not hurried, measured, moving away. She waited until morning. When the baker came in, she said nothing, just pointed to the alley. He frowned, opened the back door. There beside the bins was the cat, alive, but frozen, wide-eyed. Its paw bled, lightly, like it had stepped on something sharp. Beside it, a smear. Not big, not obvious. Just a streak. Dark, drying. Like someone had knelt there, for a moment too long. She never slept near that window again. She moved to the far corner, behind the flour sacks, and from then on, every time a cat cried in the night, she pressed her hands over her ears because sometimes it wasn't a fight. It was a warning. The priest didn't speak, not at first. He'd learned over years of whispered sins that silence opens more doors than questions ever could. The man had entered just before matins, slipped in through the side chapel, drenched from the rain, but calm. Too calm. He didn't kneel, didn't cross himself. He just sat a shadow inside the confessional. The priest waited, hands folded, head bowed. Then a voice, low, even, as if reading a grocery list. "I've done 5. A pause. "Not counting the ones before." The priest blinked. He knew better than to react. But something in that voice, it didn't tremble, didn't ache. "I don't regret it," the voice said, "but I think I'm done now. The fire's gone out. It was never about them, anyway." Another pause, then a soft chuckle, dry, like wood cracking in frost. "They keep looking for clues. They think I write the letters, but I don't. Not the silly ones." The priest swallowed, not from fear, from cold, the kind that seeps into the bones when something unnatural is too close. "I want to be forgiven," the man said, "but not by God." He wasn't there. Then silence, long enough that the priest wondered if the man had left. But he hadn't. "You're not going to absolve me, are you?" the voice asked. Not accusing, just curious. "No," the priest answered quietly. "I'm not." The man laughed again, not loud, almost kindly. "Good," he said. "I think that's what I wanted." Then the sound of boots, not hurried, just leaving. The priest waited, didn't move, didn't breathe, then finally stepped out. The church was empty. Only the pew near their back held a wet spot on the wood, where someone had sat too long. He never told anyone, not the bishop, not the papers. He only changed one habit. From that day on, he left the church door unlocked all night, not to welcome back the man, but in case someone else needed to walk away from something they hadn't done yet. She wasn't supposed to be out that late, but the coins hadn't come. And hunger doesn't wait for morning. She walked the back lanes, the ones lit just enough to look safe, but not enough to see clearly. Her shoes were thin. Her shawl was soaked. Her hands tucked into her sleeves like something was trying to pull them back inside her. She saw the man near Mitre Square, standing under the arch, not doing anything, not calling, just there, still, like a post that hadn't been there before. She passed him, faster than usual. Didn't look back, didn't need to. She felt it, not the sound of footsteps, but the absence of everything else. The wind stopped. The lamps buzzed, then dimmed, and then the tap of boot on stone. She turned the corner too quickly. There was a man ahead, a real one, the watchman. She called out, not a scream, just a name she didn't know, spoken like a plea. He turned, saw her, saw the shape behind her, then a sound, the clang of metal on stone. Her lantern, she hadn't even realized she'd been holding it, hit the ground, rolled once, then stopped. The glass cracked, the flame sputtered, then died. But for that 1 second, the flare of the fall lit up the alley, and she saw it. The glint of something in his hand, the wrong angle of his smile, and the way his coat didn't move as if the air didn't dare touch him. Then the light went out, dark again. But the watchman ran, and she ran too, and the boots behind them didn't follow. Not that time. They said she was lucky, said she'd been spared, said maybe he didn't want her. But she knew. She hadn't escaped. She'd only interrupted. Whatever was going to happen had already started, and the lantern, the one she dropped, was never found. He wasn't supposed to look. That was the rule. Sketch artists didn't investigate. They didn't theorize. They captured faces, positions, scenes, facts, not feelings. But William couldn't forget her eyes. Not because they were open, many were. Not because they were blue, though they were. Clouded slightly, like smoke trapped under glass. But because they were looking at something. Still, even in death. It was late when they brought him to Burner Street. Colder than usual. And silent, too silent for a city that never really slept. He kept his notebook tucked under his arm, his charcoal sharp, his hands in gloves thin enough to feel paper, but thick enough to shield from the stone. He stepped carefully. Always did. He never wanted to disturb the scene. It was sacred in its own strange way. And there she was, laid out as if placed, not dropped, as if someone had stepped back, tilted their head, and decided yes, just so. The light from the gas lamp nearby was weak, but steady. It cast long shadows and lit her face just enough to show the strain. Her mouth was slightly parted. Her cheek still bore the flush of cold, but the eyes, they didn't stare. They followed. That's what froze him. He moved left. They followed. He stepped right. Still, they held. He knew it was impossible. Knew how eyes fix at death. But these, they seemed to know more than they should. He crouched, began to draw quick lines. Outline of the jaw. The curl of her hair, near the gutter. He avoided the eyes, not out of fear, but respect. He didn't want to steal them. Yet they stayed on him, Gaisha, as if asking, will you show what I saw? He tried. He shaded the shadows carefully. Outlined the scarf, still wrapped, not tightly, but carelessly around her throat. Sketched the shoes, one missing its laces. And then he drew the eyes. One stroke, then another. But his hand trembled, because he realized they weren't just watching something. They had been trying to say something. There was a message, caught just behind the iris. A final thought, a last image. He looked up again, followed the angle of her gaze. It didn't lead to the Zwal or the sky. It led slightly down, to the alley's bend, to the darkness just outside the reach of light. He took a step in that direction, just one, and his boot struck something soft. He bent, a glove, black, men's, still damp. Not from rain. There was something else, too. A faint scrape on the cobblestone, like chalk, but not white, red-brown, almost a smudge. He looked back at her, the eyes still held. He whispered, without realizing, I see it. And for a moment, he thought she blinked. Of course, she didn't, but the fog shifted, and the light twitched, and his breath hitched in the same second. When he handed in the sketch, they thanked him, said it was one of his best, said it looked peaceful. He didn't answer, because peace wasn't what he'd drawn. He had drawn a woman who had seen, and who in the final second, had tried to show someone else what still stood in the dark. Later, he returned to Burner Street, not for work, just to walk, just to see. He brought the sketch with him, not to compare, just to hold. And when he reached the bend in the alley, he saw them. 2 faint circles, pressed into the grime. Boot prints, still there, though faded. They led nowhere, but they faced the spot where she had fallen. He stood there, matching his own feet to theirs, stared down at the space between them, and he realized when she died, she wasn't looking at her killer. She was looking past him, looking for someone else, maybe anyone. Maybe him. He stepped back, folded the sketch, left it in the alley, under a loose brick, a strange offering. And as he walked away, he didn't look back, not because he wasn't curious, but because he didn't want to know if the eyes were still following. It wasn't supposed to be him. He wasn't even part of the regular patrol. Just a fill-in, a name pulled from the station wall to replace someone whose wife had fallen ill. The 4th man had called off. The 5th showed up, quietly, without question. He took the lantern without comment. Checked the time. It was later than he liked. The gas lamps along Goulston Street were dimmer than usual. Some sputtered. One had gone completely out. He walked the beat slowly, deliberate. He wasn't in a rush. The others said they'd pass the same stretch every 15 minutes. And nothing unusual, nothing heard, nothing seen. But when he turned the corner, there she was. Her body lay at an angle that made no sense, as if she'd sat down and fallen sideways, as if death had tapped her on the shoulder, not struck. The 5th man froze, not because of the body. He'd seen worse, but because he realized he had just walked this way. 15 minutes earlier, same street, same stones. And she hadn't been there. There had been nothing there, and now she was... He knelt, instinctively. Didn't touch, didn't dare, but leaned close enough to see the edges. The blood hadn't spread far, which meant she'd just fallen. Moments ago, he looked up. No one. Not in the alleys. Not in the shadows. Only silence. And the echo of his own breath. He stood, backed away, lit the lantern fully, and that's when he saw them. Boot prints, crossing his own, deep in the grime, parallel, fresh. Whoever had done this, whoever had left her here had passed him, walked right past him, in the fog, in the silence, in the stretch between lamplight. And he hadn't seen. He tried to recall every figure he'd passed, every cough, every glint. But there was nothing. No memory. Just the rhythm of his own walk. He thought of the gas lamp that had gone out, the one he'd meant to report, but didn't. That exact patch of darkness. That window of 15 minutes. It had been enough. He radioed in, waited, didn't leave her. Not because of duty, but guilt. Because he was the 5th man. 4 had passed. Seen nothing. But he had passed, too. And the only thing different was what came after. When they asked for his report, he gave it plainly. No embellishment, no theory, just facts. Time, location, condition, boot prints. But in the margin, he wrote one sentence. Not for the file, just for himself. The man was in the light, and I didn't see him. Years later, he would repeat that line to himself in quiet moments, not because he remembered the face. He never saw one. But because he remembered what it felt like to walk past someone who had already decided who would die that night. It slipped out when she wasn't looking. Not a loud fall, just a soft woof, like paper sighing. It landed between 2 floorboards just far enough to go unseen, but not far enough to disappear. Alice was cleaning her grandmother's attic. The house was quiet, too quiet for spring. No birds, no wind, just the slow creak of memory held in wood. She lifted the photo gently. It was sepia, thin and curled at the edges. She assumed it was family, her great-aunt, maybe. One of the faces no one remembered clearly. But the woman in the picture looked afraid. She wasn't posing. Her mouth was slightly open, not in smile, but as if she'd been caught mid-sentence or mid-prayer. The background was a brick wall, cracked, damp in one corner. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, and her eyes were glassy, unblinking. Alice looked closer. There, in the lower margin, barely legible, in pencil, Burner Street, 888. Something moved in her chest, not fear, recognition. She had read about Burner Street in a book she wasn't supposed to open. In a chapter the teacher skipped. She flipped the photo over. Blank. She opened the old album on the trunk beside her. Its pages were yellowed, but intact. She found a space labeled 1902, Margaret's wedding. Inside, no wedding photo. Just this one, tucked behind the flap. Someone had placed it there. Intentionally. Hiding something, in plain sight. She brought the photo downstairs. Her grandmother looked at it, and something in her mouth went tight. She didn't ask where Alice found it, didn't ask why she was looking. She just said that wasn't meant to be kept. Alice waited. Eventually, the old woman spoke again. She came into the shop, years ago, before it. Who, Alice asked softly. She never gave a name, but she always bought the same thing. Lavender soap. Said it reminded her of before. Before what? Her grandmother looked out the window. I think she meant before London stopped pretending. They sat in silence. Then the old woman whispered, someone took that photo after she died. Not before. After. Alice's stomach turned. Why? Proof, her grandmother said, simply. Some men need proof, even when it breaks them. Alice stared at the image again. The torn dress, the blank wall. It was true. This wasn't a memory. It was evidence. She held the photo with both hands, carefully, as if it might shatter. Do you want me to put it back? She asked. Her grandmother shook her head. No. Put it somewhere it won't be found again. Alice wrapped it in an old handkerchief, folded it into an envelope, placed it beneath a floorboard, one that groaned gently when stepped on, and as she pressed the plank back into place, she thought she heard it again, that faint woof, like paper giving up. She only sat there because her feet hurt. The bench was splintered, damp from rain that had passed hours ago. But it was empty, and in London, an empty bench at dusk feels like a gift. She lowered herself carefully, pulled her shawl tighter. The air still smelled of coal and horse sweat, but faintly, there was something else. She noticed it before she noticed him. A scent, heavy, uncooked, like a butcher's apron that hadn't been washed, like iron, with breath. She turned slightly. He was already there. Yeah, not close, not touching, but closer than she'd have chosen. She hadn't heard him sit. He wasn't looking at her, just forward, hands resting on his thighs, a hat pulled low. Still, perfectly still. She tried not to stare, tried to tell herself it was nothing. But the smell, it clung to the air around him. And it wasn't just blood. It was colder than that, like meat left out too long, starting to turn. She shifted away. The bench creaked loudly, too loudly. He turned his head. Not fully, just enough for her to see a sliver of jaw. Unshaven, tensed. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Her heart began to beat too fast for such a quiet moment. She thought about standing, but something about moving felt unsafe, like motion would draw attention. And right now, he wasn't doing anything. He was just breathing, but even that was enough. She counted to 10. Twice. Then, slowly, rose to her feet. He didn't follow, but she smelled him again 3 blocks later. Just for a second. As if the scent had turned the corner before she had. She didn't go straight home. She took the long way, past crowded pubs, walked beneath every gas lamp she could. Only when she was certain she was alone did she exhale. Later that week, a woman was found near that same bench. No witnesses, no noise, no struggle. But a constable said something odd in passing. The butcher shop 2 streets over says someone broke in. Didn't steal money, just took liver. When she heard that, she didn't feel surprised, only tired. Like her body had already known what her mind was trying not to say. She never sat on a public bench again, even when her legs ached. Even when the city seemed to freeze around her, because she remembered that silence. And that smell. And the way it took up space without moving at all. He didn't believe in signs, or omens, or dreams that meant anything. Thomas had driven carriages through every hour of the London clock rain, frost, fog so thick it softened the hooves. He'd seen men collapse in gutters, women scream names they didn't know, children vanish into alleys like smoke. But that dream stayed with him. It came 2 nights after the murder on Mitre Square. He hadn't been near it, hadn't even known the woman, but his sleep that night felt hijacked. He dreamed he was in his carriage, just as always, horse steady, reins light in hand. But there was no sound, not from the street, not from the wheels, not even from the horse. The world was moving, but he wasn't in it. He looked down. There, beside him, was a woman, face pale, hair tucked into a scarf, eyes open, too open. He hadn't heard her enter, hadn't seen her hand the fare. She was just there. She didn't speak, but her mouth was moving, soundless, like someone shouting through a window underwater. He tried to stop the carriage, but the reins wouldn't pull. He tried to turn, but his body stayed forward, like something else was holding the spine in place. He looked again. Her mouth was still moving, and in the reflection of the coach window, he saw someone else. A figure not sitting, but crouched behind her, smiling. When he woke, his hands were shaking. His boots were wet, as if he'd stepped outside. But he hadn't. He was sure, wasn't he? He didn't tell anyone. He went to work. Usual route, quiet clients, steady horse. But that evening, as he passed Aldgate, a woman hailed him. He slowed, stopped. She stepped in without a word. And when he glanced over his shoulder, just once he saw the scarf, the pale face, the open eyes. Not her, but enough like her. Too much like her. He turned quickly, snapped the reins, drove faster than he should have, dropped her off without a word. Later that week, he told a constable, not the dream, just that something felt wrong. Like the streets weren't streets anymore, but corridors. The man laughed. "You're just rattled," he said. "Don't read the papers. Don't stay out so late." But Thomas already knew whatever he'd seen hadn't come from paper, hadn't come from fear. It had come through sleep, through memory, through something older than knowing. He still drove, still showed up, but he stopped looking at faces in mirrors. And when he parked his carriage at night, he always checked the back seat, even when it was empty. Especially then, she first noticed the scent on a Thursday. Late, past closing. The hospital halls were empty, not quiet, just hollow. Footsteps echoed longer. Coughs from distant wards sounded like they belonged to someone else. Agnes stayed behind to clean. Not a nurse, not really. More like a helper who didn't ask questions. But she always noticed the smells. Boiled linens, burnt iodine, soap so strong it felt like it could scrub grief off the walls. But that night, there was something new. Not foul, not chemical. Something in between. Sweet, sharp. Like sugar held over fire right before it burns. She followed it. Down the west corridor, past the storeroom, to the back stairwell, where they kept old uniforms and broken lamps. And there she saw him. A man, standing with his back to her, head bowed over something in his hands. She thought he was a porter, until he turned. The cloth in his hand, white, folded, was pressed tight to his own nose. He looked at her, not startled, not caught, just observed. Then he lowered the cloth, tucked it into his pocket, and walked past without a word. She didn't breathe until the door closed behind him. That scent lingered. Sweet, wrong. The next day, she checked the storeroom. Nothing missing, nothing out of place. Except a small bottle. Empty, label smudged. But she knew the word even before she saw it chloroform. It wasn't registered. Wasn't signed for. No nurse claimed it. No doctor admitted use. Agnes said nothing, but she began to notice he returned. Every few nights, always late, always alone, always with that cloth, and always with the same gentle walk, as if his shoes didn't press the ground. She told herself it was coincidence, that maybe he worked in another ward, that maybe the bottle had been old, forgotten. But the scent didn't forget. It haunted the linen carts, hung beneath the bandage drawers, clung to the edges of her apron. Then, the newspaper. Another woman. No signs of struggle, no screams, no bruising on the arms. Just a slit. Clean. Precise. Too clean. Agnes looked at the storeroom door. Then at the cloth she'd found balled behind the radiator the night before. Still damp. Still faintly sweet. She told the matron. The matron nodded, wrote it down, locked the cabinet, but said nothing more. And 3 nights later, the man came back. This time, Agnes didn't follow. She didn't hide. She just stood in the corridor. Let him see her. Let him walk past. But this time he paused. Not long. Just enough. He looked at her. Softly. No malice, no threat. But something inside her recoiled, because she realized he didn't look like a man hiding something. He looked like a man preparing, and the cloth in his hand was still wet. It had belonged to her mother, or maybe to someone even before that. She never knew. It had always just been there, on the shelf, wrapped in a silk scarf that smelled of lavender and dust. The music box didn't look like much. Faded wood, one hinge loose. The key needed coaxing, and the lid stuck in winter. But when it played, when it truly played, the sound was soft enough to hush the room. She would wind it before bed, every night, like a ritual. 4 turns, no more. It had one song, short, unfinished, like it was always about to say something, but never did. But then came the night it didn't play at all. She wound it, turned the key gently, lifted the lid. Nothing. No sound, no movement, just stillness. She stared. Inside, something new. A slip of paper. Folded once, tucked beneath the velvet lining. She didn't remember placing it there. Didn't remember anyone ever touching it. She unfolded the note. It wasn't written in full sentences. Just words. One line he said not to scream. She froze. It wasn't her mother's handwriting, nor her own. Something scratched. Unsteady. Like someone had written it while watching the door. She checked the box again. Lifted the lining. There at the base, a stain. Tiny. Brown. Blood. She wanted to believe it was ink, or rust, or time. But she knew blood when she saw it. She pushed the box back under the bed. Didn't wind it that night. Didn't sleep. The next morning, she asked her grandmother about it. The old woman didn't speak. Just took the box. Held it close. Then whispered her name was Ellen. Who, the girl asked? The one before you. She hadn't known there'd been one before. The old woman nodded. She was your mother's cousin. She stayed here, in this room, for a while, until she didn't. No one had ever said anything. Not about Ellen. Not about a girl who had vanished. Not about a song that stopped playing halfway through. The old woman opened the box. Wound it. Once. Twice. 3 times. It clicked. And the song began. Slow. Wavering. But this time, it stopped earlier than usual. Cut off mid-note. The old woman closed the lid. She never finished her last tune. That night, the girl placed the box on the shelf again. Wrapped it in the scarf. Didn't touch it. But just before sleep, she heard it. One note. High and faint. Like someone had tried to start the song again from the other side. He was used to painting sorrow. Numbers for the dead. Names that faded before the ink dried. Posters for lost women, some gone for days, some for good. But that morning, his hand wouldn't stay still. It was cold, Yes, always was in October. But this shake this slow, creeping tremor felt different. He'd been asked to paint a board for Mitre Square. Something simple. A warning. To deter the curious. Do not loiter. Crime scene under investigation. So, plain letters. Black. Block. He began with D. Steady. Firm stroke. Then the O. Halfway through the curve, his brush slipped. Just slightly. Enough to leave a smudge. He frowned. Wiped it. Dipped again. By the time he reached the C in crime, his fingers had curled inward. Not from pain, but resistance. As if something inside his hand refused to keep going. He stepped back. Shook it out. Flexed the wrist. Tried again. But as he brought the brush to wood, his vision blurred. Just for a moment. Not dark. Not dizzy. Just offset. As if the world had nudged sideways and forgotten to tell him. He steadied himself. Looked up and saw the square. Empty now. Cleaned. Bleached. The stain gone. But the corner where she'd lain, that shadow, still felt wrong. Too dark for daylight. Too still for a city. He painted faster, tried to finish, but the moment he dipped the brush for the final letter, he heard it. A hiss. Behind him. Not a voice, not breath. Like bristles dragged across stone. He turned. Nothing, just the wind. And the sign creaking on its hinge. He bent down, gathered his tools. And there beneath the plank, a footprint. Small. Fresh. Pointing toward the square. Only one. No others around it. He stepped back. Looked again. Gone. He didn't paint the last letter. Left the N unfinished. Let the sign hang open-mouthed, like it was still waiting to speak. They asked him later why the board was crooked. Why the letters slanted. Why the final word read investigatio. He just said my hand shook. And they didn't ask again, because after that week, a dozen signs hung in London, all different, all warning, all silent, and his name was never signed on any of them. It was nearly closing time. The fire had burned low. The last drink had been poured, and the pub was down to its bones, wood creaking, mugs emptied, chairs tipped against tables like men too tired to stand. Nellie was used to being the last to leave. She wiped down the counter with a cloth, already damp, hummed a tune she didn't remember learning, and kept one eye on the back hallway, just in case the cellar door rattled again. That night, something felt off. Not wrong, just not quite the same. The flames in the hearth were flickering strangely. Not from draft. The door was shut. The windows latched. Still, the light pulsed. Fast, then slow. Like someone breathing through their teeth. She looked toward the back. The hallway beyond the barrels. The one that led to the kitchen. And the door. The door that was supposed to stay bolted after sundown. But it was open. Just a crack, but enough. Light spilled from behind it. Not firelight. Something colder, paler. As if moonlight had been poured through smoke. She stepped forward, not brave, not curious. Just compelled. With each step, the light dimmed. Not all at once, but in rhythm with her breath. By the time she reached the threshold, it was almost gone. She placed a hand on the door. Pushed. The room behind it was empty. No lamp, no candle, no window. Just shadows long and curling at the edges, like they'd heard something she hadn't. She stepped inside. The floor was cold. Colder than the rest of the pub. Colder than outside. She turned, about to retreat, when the door slammed shut behind her. The sound wasn't loud, just final. The light vanished. She stood in the dark, listening. Nothing. Then a sound. Not footsteps. Not breath. The soft tick of something being wound. Like a pocket watch. Or a music box. Or a knife turning in hand. She backed toward the door. Felt for the handle. It turned, easily. She opened it, expecting to see the hallway. The barrels, the hearth. But what she saw was the bar full again. Men sitting where no one had sat. Faces she hadn't served. Smoke in the air that hadn't been lit. And at the far corner, a figure. Alone. Hat low, head bowed, unmoving. She blinked, and everything was gone. Just the dark hallway, just her hand on the knob, just the fire, still flickering strangely behind her. She didn't say anything the next morning. She just closed early that night. And every night after her, the door was bolted, then nailed, then boarded shut. But sometimes when the pub is empty again, and the fire burns too still, she swears she sees it. A faint light curling out from the cracks, not asking to be let in, just waiting. She hadn't meant to find it. The laundry was routine. She'd done it every Thursday for years. His shirts, always two. Trousers, never turned inside out. And handkerchiefs folded tight, like secrets pressed into cotton. But this one wasn't like the others. It wasn't white. It wasn't neatly folded. It was bunched, crumpled, tucked into the corner of his coat pocket like something half hidden and half forgotten. She unfolded it slowly. It wasn't stained red. Not anymore. Whatever had marked it had dried to brown, the kind of color time gives to blood when it's sat too long. At first, she told herself it was his nose. He was often sick in winter. But this wasn't dabbed. It was streaked, wiped, and there, near the edge, a single embroidered letter. E. She wasn't E. And he didn't know anyone who was, at least, not anymore. She placed the handkerchief flat on the table, looked at it like it might speak. He was a quiet man, always had been. Didn't stay out late, didn't drink much. Said he worked odd jobs, mostly deliveries, sometimes repairs. She'd believed him. Because he came home tired. Because he didn't raise his voice. Because he never looked angry. But lately, he'd been different. Not angry, just clean. Too clean. Clothes with no dust. Boots that never needed scrubbing. Nails without dirt. Like someone who walked through ash without stepping in it. She folded the handkerchief again. But this time, inside out. Hid the letter. Placed it beneath the drawer lining in her sewing box. Didn't mention it. That night, she watched him closely. He ate like always, washed his plate, sat by the window, but didn't touch her, didn't kiss her goodnight, didn't ask about her day, just sat, still, listening. Not to her, to something else. She almost asked him, almost showed him the cloth, but stopped. Because deep down, she didn't want an answer. She just wanted silence to stay harmless. The next morning, he left early. She waited, then opened the sewing box. The handkerchief was gone. She never told anyone, not even when the next name appeared in the paper. A woman, initial E, body found without her scarf. Blood wiped, not pooled. They called it cleaner than before. More practiced. She thought about asking him, just once. But he came home that night with flowers. And a clean handkerchief, folded perfectly, with no letter at all. It was a cold evening, but the kind of cold that carried light. The kind where even gas lamps seemed to glow harder, as if pushing back the fog just enough to see your breath float beside you. She was on her way home from the shop, wrapped in a borrowed coat, basket full of potatoes, bread, and nothing sweet. She hadn't looked up until she heard the footsteps behind her. Not close, not fast, but steady. She didn't quicken her pace. This was Whitechapel. Everyone had somewhere to be and reasons for not hurrying. Still, the sound kept pace. She turned the corner onto Princelet Street, where the lamps burned in a straight line, casting long shadows on wet stone. And that's when she saw him, just ahead, standing still, beneath the middle lamp, not moving, not even swaying. Just there. She slowed, so did her breath. Because something wasn't right. It wasn't the coat, though it was long and dark and unfamiliar. It wasn't the hat, though it tilted too far forward to be polite. It was the ground. There was no shadow. She looked again. The lamp above him burned steady, casting light downward, hitting his shoulders, his chest, but not the stones behind him. Nothing. He didn't cast a shadow. The figures passing in the distance, even they dragged gray shapes behind them. But not this man. He stood, lit and alone, with no echo. She stopped walking. Not by choice. Her legs simply froze. And then he turned his head. Not fast, just enough to show he'd seen her. Nah, show. She blinked, and in that second, he stepped backward, into the dark between two lamps. Gone. No sound, no retreating footsteps, no rustle of fabric. Just empty street. She hurried home, basket clutched too tightly, heart louder than her boots. She told no one, but for weeks after, she avoided that stretch, walked the longer way, even in rain. Because she hadn't just seen a man, she had seen a gap, a figure that borrowed light, but gave nothing back. And she still wonders, even now, if he ever truly left that patch of stone. They used to draw on that wall every afternoon, just a patch of brick behind the butcher's shop, low enough for little hands, smooth enough for chalk to stick. Hopscotch squares, stick figures with crooked hats, names too short to spell correctly. No one minded. The butcher looked the other way. The constable stepped around them. It was just children being children. But one morning, the drawings were different. Cleaner, sharper, and not done by a child's hand. A circle, perfect and unbroken. Inside it, an eye, wide, open, lashes too many for comfort. Beneath it, a name. No one remembered drawing it. Thorira. Especially not Mary. The chalk was still in her pocket. Still the same color, pale yellow, but worn shorter, as if someone had used it while she slept. The other children laughed, said it was a joke, a game. So they drew over it, covered the eye with flowers, crossed out the name with bright blue. By sunset, the wall looked like it always did, a blur of color and joy. But the next morning, it was back. The same circle, same eye, same name. No one saw who did it. The butcher swore no one had passed. The constable said he'd been on watch, but the wall had changed. And this time, the eye was crying. Not tears, lines, dozens of them, drawn down the bricks like rain. The children stopped playing there. One by one, Mary last of all. Until one morning, her mother found the chalk in her bedsheet, broken in two, edges wet, like someone had been chewing it. And outside, on the wall, her name, misspelled, but close enough to know. She didn't leave the house that day, or the next. And when they finally painted over the bricks, sealed them with thick whitewash, the color peeled away within a week. No more chalk drawings, no more games. But sometimes, after foggy nights, the circle reappears, faint, like it never truly left. And the eye always open. He waited by the window, not pacing, just sitting, one leg crossed over the other, watch chain in hand. It was the third time she'd come home late that week, but this night felt different. The clock ticked louder. The oil lamp flickered, even though there was no breeze. He had kissed her forehead before she left. Not hard, not possessive, just enough to say, "Be safe." And she had smiled. Not big, just the soft one she saved for promises. Back before dawn, she'd said. Clear, certain. He believed her, because she always kept her word, even when the city made it difficult, even when the streets seemed to swallow people whole. But now the light was thinning. Gray stretched across the rooftops. The silence of almost morning pressed against the glass. Still no knock at the door. He checked the clock again. The second hand was stuck, twitching against the number 6. Trying, failing. He tapped it. No change. That's when he noticed her scarf, still hanging by the door. She never left without it. Not in October. Not when the fog rolled in early. He stood, stared at the hook, and then the knock. He ran, opened the door to nothing. No one. Just the air, cooler than before, still damp with night. He looked down. At his feet, a coin. Not his. A woman's. Scratched, bent slightly. The kind she carried for cab fare. He picked it up, turned it over. It smelled like lavender. An iron. He didn't sleep, didn't eat. When the paper came later that morning, he already knew what it would say. Another woman, found just before sunrise. No witnesses, no noise, no scarf. He didn't tell them her name, didn't go to the station. He just sat by the window, watch in hand, Second hand still stuck. And outside, the sky grew light without ever feeling like morning. It was the kind of sky that holds its breath. Heavy, low, gray with a hint of yellow, like a bruise still deciding where it belongs. She had finished her errands. 2 loaves of bread, a bundle of kindling, a scrap of cheese wrapped in paper too thin to last the walk home. She turned onto Hanbury Street just as the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. And there he was, standing still under the awning of the closed tobacconist. Hat tilted forward, one hand tucked into his coat, the other holding nothing. He wasn't doing anything, wasn't asking, wasn't begging, just smiling. Not kindly, not cruelly, just enough to be noticed. She looked away, kept walking, but the street felt longer than it should. Each footstep a little too loud, the air too thick to breathe comfortably. Behind her, the smile stayed. She could feel it, pressed into her shoulder blades like warmth from a fire you hadn't lit. At the corner, she paused, not from fear, but uncertainty, the kind that wraps around the ribs and waits for a reason. She turned slightly, pretending to check the sky. He was still there, still smiling, and now barely nodding, as if they shared something, an understanding, a secret only he remembered. And then the rain began. First soft, then heavier, sharp against the stones, blurring the edges of buildings and faces. She turned back. He was gone, not behind the awning, not beneath another doorway, just gone. She stood there a moment longer, basket soaking, bread damp, trying to decide if she should feel relieved. But something told her she'd seen him too early, that he hadn't been waiting for her, not yet, and that maybe he only smiled when the sky was about to open. Later that evening, someone found another body, 2 streets over, left in the rain, and a constable would mention just offhand that a man had been seen nearby. Didn't look suspicious, he said. Wasn't following anyone. Just standing there, smiling. He wasn't supposed to be out that late, but the wind was good steady. Not too strong, the kind that holds a kite in the air like a promise. His mother had called twice, once from the window, once from the street. He pretended not to hear, or maybe he really didn't, because the sky had just begun to shift. That golden hour turning ash-gray. The moment where daylight tries to stay polite, but the dark is already waiting. His kite bobbed just above the rooftops, red and frayed at the corners, tail made from knotted scraps of ribbon. And then he saw the man, standing still at the edge of the field, not watching the kite, watching him. The boy didn't feel afraid. Not exactly, just uncertain. The way you feel when a dog looks at you from behind a fence, and you can't tell if it wants to play or bite. The man didn't move, didn't wave, just watched. Long coat, too clean for the dust. Hat pulled low, even with no sun. The boy looked away, back to the sky, to his kite. But the wind dropped just for a second, and in that second, he let go. Not by accident, not in fear, but because something in him whispered, now. The string slipped through his fingers. The kite lifted, floated, then dipped right toward the man. But he didn't catch it, didn't even flinch. The kite landed at his feet. Then the wind rose again, pulling it gently into the grass. The boy turned and ran, home, faster than he'd meant to. He didn't look back. Later that night, he told his mother, not everything, just that he lost the kite. She sighed, maybe someone will find it. He nodded, but didn't hope. The next morning, they found something in the field. Not the kite, something else. Ribbons, tied neatly, laid in a line toward the alley's mouth, and beside them, a shoe. Small, worn, not a child's, but somehow familiar. The boy never asked for another kite, not because he was scared, but because he couldn't remember if the man had ever blinked. It was meant for morning. Just a small candle. Plain, beeswax, hand-dipped, with a slight lean in its spine. Left at the head of an unmarked grave, along the edge of the pauper's row where names faded before the wood even dried. She had lit it for a stranger. No family, no funeral. Just a line in the paper and a whisper in the pub. She was the quiet one. Didn't deserve it. The flame caught fast, burned straight. No flicker, even in the wind. She stayed a while, not praying, just watching. The wax pooled too slowly. She returned the next evening, just to check, and the candle was still burning. Same height, same steady flame, same soft scent of honey and smoke. She thought she'd made a mistake. Maybe it was a new candle. Maybe someone else had replaced it. But no one came here, not to this part of the graveyard. She asked the groundskeeper. He shook his head. No one touches that row. Too many stories. Too many widows. She left it alone until the fourth night. Rain had come. Hard. Enough to flood the corners of the street. Enough to put out lanterns. But not the candle. It burned quietly, without melting. She stepped closer, bent low, held her palm above the flame. No heat. She touched the wax. Cold. Still solid. But the flame remained. She backed away. The next morning, the paper carried another name. Another woman. Another corner of the city pulled into silence. And the candle, still there. Still lit. Only now the flame leaned slightly, as if bowing. By the end of the week, 3 more names. The candle never shortened, but its light began to stretch. Longer, thinner, as if reaching for something. She didn't light it again, didn't visit after dark, but from her window, she swore she could still see it. Just beyond the hill, just past the trees, like a warning, or a beacon, or both. Some nights, she thought of snuffing it, of walking barefoot through the wet grass, leaning in, and pinching it between her fingers. But she never did, because it felt less like a candle and more like an eye that refused to close. It was nearly empty by then, just the clink of a spoon in a chipped cup, and the slow hiss of steam that never quite faded. The sort of hour where conversation happens below the breath, and every word feels borrowed from silence. The waitress didn't mean to eavesdrop, but it was hard not to. They weren't arguing. They weren't upset. They were whispering carefully, as if the words themselves were sharp. One was older, wore his coat like it had never been removed. The other, younger, hair too neat for this part of London. She caught a few words at first. Throat, too clean. Letter was real this time. She refilled their cups. Neither looked at her. They leaned in closer. He kept part of it, the older one said, not shocked, just tired. The younger nodded. She was still warm, he murmured. Still warm when they found her. The waitress froze. She didn't stir the sugar, didn't lift the pot, just waited. They didn't notice, or pretended not to. I think he wants us to understand something, the younger said. Not just fear. A message. The older shook his head. No. He doesn't care if we understand. He only cares if we notice. They both paused, then looked up, not at her, but past her. To the window, to the street outside. Nothing was there. Just mist, lamplight, and a coat hanging in the fog, too still for the breeze. The older man stood, paid in coins that felt cold to her hand. Before leaving, he glanced at her only once, and said, "Lock your door early. The shadows have mouths." They left. She didn't clean their table, didn't touch their cups, didn't sweep the sugar ring one had left behind. Just stood there, listening. To the steam, to the silence. And outside where the coat had been was now just the faintest outline in the fog, still shaped like someone who had been listening. He was the one who sorted them. Every morning, ink-stained fingers, spectacles low on his nose. A routine that made sense of chaos postcards, bills, folded apologies no one would read. But this one felt strange before he even opened it. The envelope was too clean. Paper too thick. Corners sharp, like something not meant to be touched. The address was scrawled, but not carelessly, deliberately awkward. as if someone had tried very hard to make it look unsteady. He opened it anyway. No salutation, no date, just lines, short, slanted, written with pressure so uneven the ink had pooled and vanished in the same stroke. It read, "She said my name, but not loud enough. She didn't want the others to know, so I showed her what silence can do." He blinked, turned the page over. Nothing on the back, but something itched at him. The writing was mirrored, not reversed, just unnatural. Like someone had used their left hand to hide that they were right-handed, or the other way around. He checked the signature. There wasn't one, just a smudge. A fingertip pressed too hard into the bottom corner, almost like a stamp. He'd seen letters before, from pranksters, from terrified men trying to sound brave, from reporters pretending to be killers. But this one didn't pretend. It didn't ask for attention. It didn't boast. It just explained, in a way that felt like a warning meant for someone specific. He brought it to the inspector, laid it on the desk without a word. The inspector read it, then read it again, then asked, "Why did you open it?" He shrugged. No return? Felt wrong. The inspector looked up, something in his eyes distant. "Do you notice anything?" The clerk nodded. Yes. It wasn't written with the hand that usually sins. The inspector said nothing more. Filed the letter into a drawer that locked with 2 keys. Burned the envelope. Later, the clerk would hear about the new girl, the one who whispered a name before she died. A name that didn't match any suspect. A name not in any file. Just a name. Slurred, soft, and never repeated. He never forgot the letter, nor the print on the corner. He remembered its shape, its curve, and how it looked like the finger had hesitated before pressing down. It was supposed to be routine. 1 frame, taken at dawn. The street already cordoned, the inspector's boots still wet from the morning fog. The photographer worked fast. The plate had to be cleaned just right. Light measured, shutter held. He took the picture because someone asked, not because he wanted to. They needed records now, not just words. Something they could point to, in case the silence ever asked back. He went home that afternoon, developed the plate in his cellar. Same as always. Tray of chemicals, safe light overhead, hand steady. At first, it was just a blur, a curb, a body. The smear of someone's boot print where they shouldn't have stepped. He waited, rocked the tray gently, watched the shadows emerge, and then a shape. To the left, near the wall. He hadn't noticed anyone standing there. He was sure of it. But there, half in frame, was a man, barely defined, hat low, coat high. No face, no motion blur, just stillness. Like the camera had caught something no one else could see. He stared, lifted the plate, held it to the light. It wasn't damage, wasn't reflection. It was presence. He checked his notes. Only 3 men were on scene. None wore a coat like that. He checked the lens. Clean? Checked the exposure. Correct. But the man remained. The next day, he showed the inspector. The inspector didn't speak. Just tapped the figure once, then handed the image back. "Don't circulate this," he said. No explanation. Just finality. But the photographer kept a copy, not out of defiance, out of need. Because something in him whispered, "You saw it." So did the camera. And it wants to be remembered. He placed it in a drawer, not hidden, just stored. Until, weeks later, he returned to it, and the figure had moved, just slightly. An inch forward, a tilt in the head. Impossible. Whoa. He hadn't touched the plate. No one had. But the shape had changed. Not a lot. Just enough. Enough to know that whatever was caught in that frame wasn't finished yet. No one had lived there for months. The curtains still hung, stiff with soot. The wallpaper had started to curl at the edges, like it had grown tired of holding on. But the room wasn't empty. Not completely. Mrs. Keene came to check it once a week. Wipe down the window. Tap the floorboards to keep the rats disinterested. Place a fresh sprig of rosemary on the sill, not for smell, but for memory. It had been her niece's room, briefly, before everything became too expensive, before the last walk. She never moved her things out, didn't have the heart or the need. But last Thursday, when she stepped inside, the air had changed. It wasn't musty, wasn't sour with mildew or old soap. It smelled like ashes, not wood, not paper, fabric, wool, cotton, things meant to warm you. Burned, but there'd been no fire. She checked the grate. Cold, clean. Checked the oil lamp. Empty. Still, the smell hung there. She touched the pillow. Warm, just faintly, like someone had laid their head down and left a memory behind. She opened the wardrobe, everything untouched. Dresses still folded, boots still scuffed the same way they always had. But something was missing. A scarf, gray with red embroidery at the edge. She remembered folding it, placing it on the chair. It was gone. There. She said nothing. Not to her sister, not to the landlord. Some things, if you name them, settle in. Instead, she opened the window, let the air move, let the smoke, whatever it was, drift. But the scent remained, even the next day, and the one after. When someone came to view the room, they stepped back before crossing the threshold. "It smells like something finished here," they said. Mrs. Keene nodded, apologized, closed the door behind them. Later that week, the papers mentioned a new victim. Scarf missing. Red thread found near the collarbone. She didn't read the rest. She just walked back to the room, lit a match, held it beneath the rosemary sprig. Let the scent of burn become real for once. She didn't remember running, only the sound of her shoes on wet stone. And the way the streetlight fractured in the puddle before her, like the world had cracked open just a little. She'd been walking home. Same path, same time, same breath held between each lamppost. He stepped from the alley too quietly, not fast, not urgent, just there. A shape she registered before her mind could name it. She didn't scream, not at first. She thought maybe he was just passing through, looking for warmth, for coin, for anything other than her. But then he looked at her, not with need, with certainty, like he knew something she hadn't realized about herself. She stepped back. He stepped forward. That's when she screamed. It tore through her throat like it had been waiting. Like it wasn't just for her, but for every woman who hadn't lived long enough to let theirs loose. A door opened, just one, and that was enough. He vanished, not into the dark, but behind it. She collapsed on the stoop, shoes split, stockings torn, but breathing. The constable found her an hour later, still shaking, still whispering one word, hat. The only detail she could give. Low-brimmed, too clean, unmoving in the wind. They logged her name, sent her home. But in the report, they wrote distressed, uncertain of direction, likely confused, détié. She knew exactly where she'd been, exactly how far from dying she had stood. But no one asked again. Gosh. The next day, they found the last body, Mary Jane. And the constable didn't speak when he passed her in the street. But he tipped his hat, low, the way the man had worn his. She always said sorry, and for stepping too close, for asking a question, for existing in the space you hadn't even claimed. Sorry, love, she'd whisper, before she even looked up. She didn't mean it as a plea, or as shame. It was just what life had taught her. You apologize first, so no one has to decide if they're bothered by you. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols. Most people called her Polly, but even fewer remembered that. She woke most mornings before the city, not by choice, just by chill. There was a moment between dream and waking when she forgot the cold floor beneath her, and then the ache in her shoulder would return, where the cobblestone had pressed too long. She'd sit up slowly, press her palms together for warmth, and say sorry to no one for having slept there at all. There were nights she paid for a bed, just a penny, enough to lean against a rope strung across a room where bodies hung like coats, waiting for morning. But most nights, she didn't make the penny. Not because she didn't try, but because London's shadows were full of women trying harder. She'd once had a home, a husband, children. She could still remember the feel of carpet under her toes when she stepped out of bed to check on the baby. Still remembered the hair ribbon she tied around her wrist when she couldn't afford a bracelet. But life had a way of softening even memory. And now, she spoke more with nods than with names. There was a man who sometimes gave her a crust of bread. She called him sir. He called her you. That was enough. On the night before her name made headlines, she wore her favorite bonnet. It had a tear on the inside seam, but from the front, it looked almost proper. She straightened it 3 times before heading out, checked her reflection in the window of a closed butcher shop, smiled at her own shape. It wasn't vanity. It was hope. She told a friend she'd be back soon. Just needed to try one more street. Back before light, she said. And she said sorry before she walked away. There's no record of what she saw in those final minutes. No account of whether she passed someone she knew. No one asked what she was thinking. But someone remembered her dress. How the hem had been carefully mended with blue thread. Not to match, but to hold. Someone else said she hummed when she walked. Only when she thought she was alone. Not songs with words. Just a rhythm. Soft. Like someone rocking a child who wasn't there anymore. They found her not long after dawn. They counted her wounds, measured the pool beneath her. They wrote her name in ink that dried too fast, filed her into history. But they didn't write that she used to laugh when it rained, or that she said thank you when someone handed her a crust even if she didn't eat it, or that she apologized to lampposts when she bumped into them. She had lived. That should have been enough. Maybe you passed her once. Maybe she stepped aside so you wouldn't have to. Maybe she smiled without asking anything in return. And maybe if you heard someone say sorry too quietly to be noticed, it was her voice, still echoing. Still here? She didn't count coins the way others did. To most, a penny was a penny. To Annie Chapman, it was half a night's rest, 2 sips of broth, 3 minutes in the warm. She'd lay them out carefully, on her skirt, on a flat board, sometimes just the palm of her hand. Copper discs, rubbed smooth with use. Tiny suns, not enough to save her, but enough to stall the cold. She wasn't always like this. There had been times of green gardens and polished shoes. A husband who drank too much, but once tucked wildflowers behind her ear. Children who laughed before the coughing began. The kind of life that disappeared slowly. So slowly, she almost didn't notice it leaving. But one day, the house was someone else's. The bed no longer hers. And Annie was a woman standing on Hanbury Street, trying not to flinch when the butcher's boy looked through her. She had pride, still, but it had softened, frayed like the edges of her coat, worn too long at the elbows, patched with mismatched cloth. Each morning, she checked her boots, not for holes, but to be sure they still remembered her feet. That day, she had 4 pence, not enough for a bed, but nearly. She'd earned it, stitching, selling a broken comb, mending a stranger's coat with her own thread. She ran her thumb over each coin before dropping it in her pocket. Not greed, not caution, just a ritual, a way to say, you're still here. A woman saw her near the Spitalfields market. Annie had paused to watch the bread being baked. Didn't ask for any. Just watched the steam rise like ghosts she didn't want to scare. Later, someone said she'd argued with another woman, that her voice was raised. But Annie's voice didn't rise. It curved, bent around sentences like someone used to being interrupted. The last time she was seen, she was walking slowly, not drunk, not lost, just tired. She held her hand in her pocket, fingers wrapped around the last coin. 1 penny, still warm. When they found her, her belongings were laid out. 2 combs, a piece of muslin, a folded envelope she used to keep tobacco, and no coins. But she wasn't robbed, because some things aren't taken. They're swallowed, used up, not for violence but for delay. Annie Chapman counted coins like other people counted time. And when she ran out, there wasn't a sound, only the city carrying on. Boots on stone, steam in the gutters, a woman's name written down beside the word common. But she wasn't common. She was precise, deliberate, alive. And she bought herself more time than anyone ever gave her credit for. She walked fast, not hurried, just practiced, like someone who had learned that staying still meant being seen too clearly. They called her Long Liz, but no one ever asked what she left behind in Sweden. Not really, not the name, not the child, not the cough that came and went with the weather. She had lived a dozen lives before she reached Whitechapel. Washed linens, sewed dresses, lied about her age when it helped, told the truth when it didn't. At the shelter on Flower and Dean Street, she slept near the door, not for safety, but for exit. She was polite, even cheerful. She'd joke with the others, hold their things while they argued with the matron, press a coin into a girl's hand when the girl pretended not to cry. But no one knew where she went on Tuesdays. No one asked. She kept a small brooch in her coat pocket, shaped like a swan, tarnished, one wing broken. She never wore it, but her fingers found it when the street turned darker than usual, when footsteps didn't match the rhythm of the city. That night, she wore a flower in her dress. Someone said it was for luck. She never said why. She was seen laughing just before midnight, not loudly, just enough. Then she turned down Burner Street. Someone heard her say no, but softly, as if trying not to draw attention. When they found her, her body was angled carefully, almost posed, but different from the others. There were no deep wounds, only the first mark. Some believe he was interrupted, that he didn't have time. But maybe, just maybe, she looked him in the eye, and he saw something there that he couldn't carve out. A secret, kept so long it had hardened into armor. They buried her under her real name, Gustafsdotter. But the brooch was never found, and the flower in her dress still intact. She could do voices. That's what the girls remembered. Not her boots, or the bottle she sometimes carried, or the way she always seemed one laugh away from something sharper. They remembered how she told stories. Whole epics, recast with fruit vendors and constables, with heroes who wore aprons and villains who smelled of boiled cabbage. She'd lean against the alley wall, chin tilted, and become anyone. A rich widow, a cowardly king, a hungry ghost who hated potatoes. She made the others laugh, real, chest-deep laughter. The kind that makes you forget, just for a moment, that you haven't eaten since yesterday. No one ever asked if the stories were true. They weren't meant to be. Catherine, they called her Kate, once said she'd rather make someone smile than eat a hot meal. Though most days, she didn't get either. She used to have a man, kind enough, drank too much. But she'd left him once, then gone back, then drifted again. Not because she was restless, but because sometimes the world fits better when you don't sit still. She had kids. Once, she didn't talk about them. Only once, when she was drunk, she sang a lullaby in a voice too careful to be careless. That night, they found her in a cell, sleeping it off. The constable said she sang before falling asleep. Something soft, in a language he didn't know. When they let her go, she thanked them, straightened her shawl, walked into the fog like a woman late to something worth being early for. She was seen again near Mitre Square, talking to a man, maybe two, laughing, of course, then silence. They found her later. What he did to her was worse than the rest. Too clean, too measured, like he wanted the story told his way. But he didn't know Kate. She had already written herself into 100 minds, a dozen voices, 1,000 chuckles. They buried her with a pauper stone. No mention of the stories, no trace of the laughter. But if you ever pass a narrow lane and hear someone chuckling, alone, without reason, it might just be her, still telling stories to keep the dark from getting too heavy. Her room was always warm, not because of the fireplace that barely worked, not because of the walls they let the wind speak through the cracks, but because she filled it. With humming, with laughter, with the kind of silence that didn't feel empty. Mary Jane Kelly was the youngest, the prettiest, they said, the one who still wore color when everyone else had settled for gray. She kept a small looking-glass above the basin. Sometimes, late at night, she'd lean close to it and practice smiling like a woman in a painting, not because she was vain, but because it reminded her she was still here. They said she was Irish, or Welsh, or maybe both. She said she'd been to Paris, had sung in halls where chandeliers blinked like stars, that she once wore silk, and danced until her feet bled, but in the good way. No one knew if it was true, but when she spoke, you believed her anyway. She lived in a room on Dorset Street, tiny, unfinished, but it had a window, and behind the curtain, she sang. Not loudly, just enough to keep the shadows company. She sang old songs, ones no one asked for, ones that made the air feel like it remembered something. Sometimes, the neighbors would stop outside her door, not to listen, but just to stand there, because the sound made them feel less alone. She didn't have much. A chair, a bed, a few folded dresses, but she had rhythm, a grace in how she moved, how she spoke, how she turned a single candle into something almost sacred. On her last night, someone heard her singing, softly, steady, a song that didn't have a name, just a feeling. Then nothing. The next morning, the curtain was still drawn. Too still. The landlady knocked. Once, twice, no answer. She should have gone in, but something held her. It wasn't fear, it was knowing. They found her later. The curtain still pulled shut. The candle melted down to a stub. What happened inside that room was worse than all the others, but no one ever heard her scream. Maybe she didn't. Maybe she was already somewhere else. Back in Paris. Dancing, laughing, singing to a mirror that didn't care if she was real. They wrote about her beauty, about her room, about how young she was. But they didn't write about the sound, about the way she filled the space with melody like a spell, about the curtain still drawn as if trying to protect her even after. No one knew her name. Not really. There were guesses, fragments. Maybe Ellen, someone said. Could have been Alice, said another. But no one agreed, because no one had asked when she was alive. She was there, though, every evening. Same corner near the tannery, where the smell of boiled leather made even hunger taste metallic. She wore boots that didn't match, one brown, cracked at the heel, the other black, too big by a size. She tied them with the same piece of twine, looped 3 times, carefully, like she thought someone might notice. She always carried a bag, not full, not empty, just kept close. She'd sit when the light changed, when the shadows got longer than the buildings. Fold her coat tighter, even if the air was warm. A baker once said she spoke like a teacher, the kind who had stopped teaching because she got too tired of speaking to people who never listened. She never begged, never shouted, never smiled too wide. But when a child dropped a coin near her feet, she picked it up, brushed it clean with her sleeve, and handed it back without a word. She wasn't loud, she wasn't in the way, and maybe that's why no one wrote her name down, eh? When she didn't appear one night, the space she left behind felt too obvious, like a chair pulled from a table but not pushed back in. A few women asked, quietly, "Have you seen her? The one with the boots, the bag, the careful hands." No one had. And then someone found the bag, not on her, just left. Inside, a handkerchief. A book with half the pages torn out. 3 buttons. A newspaper clipping, folded into 8ths, the kind of fold someone does when they want to keep something, but can't carry much. And a name, written once, crossed out once. No last name. The record never made it to the police, because there wasn't one. No birth certificate, no next of kin, no home address. Just a woman who had moved quietly enough that the city forgot to count her. But someone remembered the way she wrapped her scarf. How she always left a bit loose, so the wind could tuck itself in. Someone remembered her voice. How she said thank you without needing anything. And someone else, the woman who cleaned the alley, said she swore she saw her again weeks later, standing at the corner just after sunset. Same mismatched boots, same twine. No words, just a nod. And then she was gone. She made it back. That should have mattered. Emma Smith walked home with wounds, real ones, deep ones. She climbed the stairs, step by step, bleeding. Knocked on the door of the lodging house on Osborne Street, leaning on the frame, barely standing, but standing all the same. And she told them, she told them what happened. That there were men, more than one, that it wasn't quick, that it wasn't robbery, that it wasn't the first time someone like her had been followed. They wrote it down, not all of it, just enough. Attacked? Unknown assailants, likely gang-related. She was still breathing. That made it easier for them to look away. She was taken to the hospital. Still conscious, still trying to explain, words slurring from pain, but clear enough. She said they, she said followed, she said please. No one followed up. She died the next day. The injuries were too much. And history, well, history prefers its victims dead and mysterious. So Emma was left out, not officially, but gently, quietly, as if her survival had made her inconvenient. Die. Some say she wasn't a Ripper victim, that it didn't fit the pattern, that she didn't belong to the story. But she belonged to this story, the one where women are hurt, then asked to explain why it happened, where bleeding and breathing aren't enough to earn belief. She was the first, or maybe just the first to speak. And still, she disappeared. Not in a fog, not in a scream. In a paragraph no one footnoted. In a report folded too neatly. In a city already turning its gaze to someone worse. But she was here. She warned them. She said they're watching, and they were, just not the ones listening. She died before the story started. That's what they said. Before the letters. Before the name. Before the city realized it was supposed to be afraid. Her name was Martha Tabram, and on August 7th, 1808, she was found on the stairs of a dark tenement just off George Yard. 39 stab wounds. No message. No initials. No signature. Just wounds. And in that absence, they decided she didn't count. She didn't fit. Not clean enough. Not theatrical. Too much rage. Not enough style. So they put her down as a maybe. A question mark. A name with an asterisk. But someone had stabbed her 39 times. That's not accident. That's not impulse. That's someone making a decision over and over and over again. She had a room once. Shared. 4 walls and a window that faced a brick wall. She'd walk from pub to pub. Not for drink, but for company. For a bit of music. For a laugh that sounded like it belonged to someone else. The night she died, she'd gone out with a soldier, or so they said. She was seen climbing the stairs. No one heard her scream. Maybe because she didn't. Maybe because she didn't get the chance. Maybe because screaming had never worked before. When they found her, it was still dark. Her boots were scuffed at the toe, as if she'd kicked once softly, then stopped. They wrote her name, measured the wounds, drew the angles, and moved on. Because weeks later, another woman died. And this one was different. So they drew a new beginning. Started the story there. And Martha became the prologue no one reads. But she wasn't a prelude. She was an ending. A whole life cut short with such violence that the silence afterward felt offensive. 39 times. And still not enough for them to say, she matters. She does. She never liked to intrude. That was her rule. Let tenants have their quiet. Let rooms hold their own hush. But that morning felt strange. Too quiet. Not the soft quiet of sleep, but the kind that made her spine stiffen as she climbed the stairs. Mary Jane hadn't come down for tea. Not unusual. But the kettle had whistled twice. and the room above had stayed still. She stood at the door. Room 13, the only one with lace over the glass. Mary Jane's doing. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again. Louder. Still nothing. She pressed her ear to the door. No footsteps. No voice. No creak of the iron bed frame. Just stillness. She raised her hand to knock a third time, but hesitated. Something in her ribs told her, don't. She did it anyway, soft, then lowered her hand. She turned the knob. Locked. Of course. She stepped back. Stared at the door. At the lace curtain fluttering, even though there was no breeze. She almost called for help. Almost. But instead, she walked back downstairs. Told herself Mary had gone out early. Told herself it wasn't her business. She didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, they forced the door. What they saw made the constable retch. What they found made the papers sing. But she just stood in the hall, hand to her mouth, saying, I knew, over and over, but too late for it to matter. She knocked 3 times, then stopped. That's what she remembered. That she'd waited for something, a voice, a sound, a breath. But all she got was lace. Still fluttering. Still pretending the room wasn't full of quiet that had already decided to stay. She never said his name. Not because she didn't know it, but because no one asked. At least, not seriously. She'd told the constable what happened. That she was followed. That the footsteps stopped when hers did. That a man brushed past her on a narrow street, then turned. That he looked at her like she'd ruined something. She said she ran. Fast. Hard. Shoes half off. Hard ahead of her body. She said she didn't scream. Not at first. Because at first, she thought maybe it was her fault for walking alone. For being out after curfew. For being alive. She survived. That made it messy. The others were mourned. Documented. Turned into headlines and whispers. But her, she was just an inconvenience. A story that didn't end in ink. So she left London. Vanished into a town with fewer corners, more fields, more fog, but a softer kind. Years passed. She married a man who didn't ask questions. Had a daughter who hummed while folding laundry. Never mentioned the night when her breath became weapon and shield all at once. Until the granddaughter. The one who listened better than most. The one who asked softly, one autumn night, did you ever know anyone who saw him? She didn't answer, just walked to the dresser, pulled open a drawer, lifted a scarf, and beneath it, a shoe. Just one, still scuffed from where it had bent while running on cobblestones. She placed it on the table, ran her fingers along the heel. I never saw his face, she said, but I think he saw mine. That was all. No names, no details. Just the shoe, and a silence that stretched like a breath never exhaled. When she died, the granddaughter kept it, not as proof, but as reminder that sometimes the ones who survive carry not answers, but questions. Ones that never find words, only wait. He was never caught. He was clever, precise, a surgeon with shadows. He always struck when the gas lamps burned lowest. It sounds like they're describing an artist, not a murderer. Daga. The story of Jack the Ripper doesn't begin with blood. It begins with failure. Failure by the police. Failure by a city. Failure by a society that believed it was modern, but still didn't listen when women screamed. But failure is hard to tell. It's messy. It doesn't make for a clean narrative. No sharp edges, no satisfying end. So they built something else, a myth. A man who vanished into fog, who carved with intention, who selected his victims as if flipping pages in a ledger, who was too clever to be caught. If he was perfect, then no one had to feel responsible, you know. If he was unstoppable, then no one had really failed. But the truth is, he wasn't brilliant. He was lucky, and London was distracted. Investigations were confused. Evidence was lost. Officers disagreed. The press printed half-truths. The public didn't trust the police. And the police didn't trust poor women. In that chaos, he didn't have to be smart. He just had to walk into the places no one looked, at the hour no one listened. But that's not how we tell it. We say he was a ghost, he was a genius, he was never found. We give him power, because power is easier to admire than a system that broke itself. If he was the perfect killer, then we don't have to ask why no one stopped him, why no one protected them, why no one believed the first scream. But if you look closer, you'll find the cracks. Misspelled names, confused reports, blood on a wall no one wiped away. He wasn't a legend. We made him one because the truth was too ordinary and too sad. People love a mystery, especially the kind that doesn't ask too much of them. Jack the Ripper gave them just that. A villain with no face, no voice, no clear reason. And into that silence, they poured everything. He was a doctor, a royal, a foreigner, a woman, a painter, a butcher, a midwife. Anyone could be him. And that made him useful. He stopped being a man and became a canvas. Detectives guessed. Writers speculated. Tour guides turned guesses into scripts. Each new theory added a twist, a clue, a dramatic reveal. But rarely a victim, rarely the name of a woman, rarely her voice, her face, her story. The spotlight always turned back to him or who he might have been. They asked, was he right-handed or left? But not, why didn't she have enough for a bed that night? They studied the angle of the wounds, but not the way she held her coat closed in the wind. They measured footprints, but not how far she'd walked that day to stay alive. Truth was never the point. The guessing became the comfort. The unsolved part became the performance. It was safer that way, cleaner, because the moment you stop asking, who was he, and start asking, why did no one protect them, the mystery isn't thrilling anymore. It becomes a mirror. And mirrors are quieter than legends. We know how they died. We've read the reports, measured the cuts, mapped the alleyways. We know what time the body was found, what the weather was like, which direction her head was facing. But we don't know what she hoped for the day before, or what made her laugh, or what song she hummed when she thought no one was listening. We remember Mary Jane's curtains, but not her voice. We remember Polly's wounds, but not the shape of her hands when she tried to warm them in the morning. We remember Annie's throat, but not her favorite color back when she still wore ribbons. The stories of their deaths are everywhere in books, on walking tours, in Halloween costumes. Their lives are harder to find. We reduce them to victims, to types, to a line in a timeline labeled event. Some were mothers, some were daughters. All were women with full lives before a man turned them into silence. And even that silence was taken from them and filled with someone else's narrative. She wasn't just a prostitute. She was cold. She was tired. She had run out of choices. She wasn't nameless. We just didn't listen when she spoke. History carved her death into marble, but left her life written in chalk. And the rain came quickly. Jack the Ripper didn't act alone. He wielded the knife, but the silence around him was built long before he came. It was in the way police reports forgot full names, in how the coroner asked more about drink than dignity, in how the newspapers wrote about unfortunates as if poverty was a personality trait. It was in the way the city lit the rich streets with gaslight and left the others in shadow. It was in the lodging houses, where a woman could be turned away for lacking a coin, even if it was cold, even if she had nowhere else to go. It was in the public who read the headlines with fascination, but skipped the parts where she was someone's sister. This wasn't just one man hunting in the dark. It was a system that didn't flinch when poor women vanished. It didn't need to cover up the crimes. It just had to delay, dismiss, distract. To say she was drunk, she was out too late, she was already broken, and suddenly her death didn't feel like a tragedy. It felt like a footnote. The system didn't hide the bodies. It hid the truth inside the kinds of questions no one thought to ask. Because silence isn't always neglect. Sometimes it's design. He's in films, in novels, on t-shirts, on coffee mugs. You can buy tickets to stand where he might have stood. You can hear his story told in pubs with candlelight and a narrator in a cloak. Jack the Ripper became something useful, a tourist attraction, a character, a shorthand for danger that never touches you. But you won't find him in the alley anymore. He doesn't need to be there. He walks now in headlines that ask, what was she wearing, in courtroom questions like why didn't she leave, in stories that linger on the killer long after they've forgotten the names of the dead. He lives in the parts of our culture that turn violence into trivia, that reward the mystery and bury the grief. And the women, the real ones, become symbols, then background, then erased. We carry him, sometimes without knowing. Every time we tell the story and make him the main character, every time we light the scene just right, but forget to say her name. He was a man, once. Now he's a shadow we keep alive by telling it too beautifully and too often, without asking who's still listening. London is quieter now. The fog has lifted. The boots have stopped echoing. The lamps burn steadily. But something still hums beneath the stone. It's not the name. It's not the man. It's not the knife. It's the silence that came after, and how long it stayed. The city kept moving. Washing streets, printing papers, locking doors a little earlier than before. But not much changed. Someone still lit a candle on the windowsill facing Dorset Street. Someone still knocked 3 times, then stopped. Someone still sang behind a closed curtain, just once more, before sleep. And in the space where breath used to be, there is only quiet now, but not peace. There's a difference, because this story didn't end. It was folded, tucked into drawers, filed under Unsolved, whispered on walking tours, next to souvenir mugs and postcard maps. It's the kind of ending that keeps its eyes open. Now, that shifts slightly when the room grows dim. And if you listen closely, really listen, you can still hear it. The scraping of a boot. The soft knock of a hand against a door that no one ever opened in time. Some of them were buried without names. Others with names no one said aloud anymore. They were labeled by how they died, not how they lived. She wasn't Polly. She was the first one. She wasn't Catherine. She was the worst one. She wasn't Mary. She was the one with the room. Even in memory, they were reduced. Their lives clipped short twice. Once by the man, then again by the story. You can feel it in the way the records shrink them, female. Age 42, occupation uncertain. As if they weren't full of thoughts. As if they didn't have favorite songs, or bad habits, or a pair of gloves they loved too much to throw away. They died, yes. But it wasn't just the dying. It was the after. When no one asked what she hoped for that week. When no one saved her handwriting. When her name was printed beneath headlines, but never spoken with care. That's what lingers longest. Not blood, but the absence of anyone who remembers how she looked when she laughed. Because being forgotten is a kind of death too. Quieter, slower, and far harder to mourn. Close your eyes. It's late. You have no money. Not enough for a bed. Not tonight. You're cold. Not dramatic cold, but the kind that starts in your fingers and works inward. Your shoes are damp. Your coat doesn't close all the way. You've already walked too far to turn around. You pass a doorway. The light is on. But you don't know anyone inside, and they don't know you. You keep walking. You tell yourself, just a few more minutes. Maybe someone will help. Maybe you'll find a place that lets you rest. Then, footsteps. Not fast, just close. You look back. No one. Or maybe someone, or you tighten your scarf, pick up your pace. But the streets are a labyrinth, and you don't know which turn leads to safety and which leads to silence. Now ask yourself, would you have survived? Would you have trusted your instincts soon enough? Would you have shouted? Would someone have answered? Or would you have done what most people do? Made yourself small, kept your head down, hoped it would pass. They didn't die because they were weak. They died because the city didn't leave them many options, and because no one came when they needed someone to believe them before it was too late. Today, we have cameras, Alarms, streetlights that hum all night. We tell ourselves we're safer now. We know better. But ask yourself, do women still carry keys between their fingers? Still text when they get home? Still glance over their shoulder on a well-lit street just in case? We have podcasts now. We analyze cases. We dissect motives. We rank killers by infamy and turn victims into trivia. We know Jack the Ripper's name, or the names we've given him. But how many people can name the women? Even now, when we tell the story, he gets the title, The Ripper. They get a footnote. They're still described by where they were found, not who they were before that. So maybe we haven't changed. Maybe we've just added more light to see the same shadows. The questions are still here. We just ask them louder, with better microphones. But sometimes, we forget to listen to the answers that never made it into the official report. Breathe in, breathe out. You're not in Whitechapel. You're not standing beneath a flickering gas lamp. Not walking alone past shuttered windows. Not holding your coat closed with cold hands and hope. You're here, wherever here is, a room that's warmer, a bed that's softer, a light that stays when you ask it to. The fog isn't real now, just memory, just sound. No footsteps behind you, no knock you can't answer, no newspaper headline that forgets your name. You've walked with them tonight, Polly, Annie, Liz, Kate, Mary Jane, and all the ones history tried to leave behind. But their story is quiet now, quieter than before. Not because it's over, but because it's safe in your hands. And you're safe, too. You can rest. You can close your eyes and let their voices drift into something softer. The city has faded, and the silence that once felt like forgetting now feels like peace. Because you're not there anymore. You're here, alive, breathing, still listening. Not every story is meant to be solved. Not every name is meant to be famous. But every life, especially the quiet ones, deserves to be remembered. You didn't turn away. You stayed. You listened through fog, through alleys, through footsteps that never quite reached their destination. You remembered the women, not for how they died, but for how they lived. For the way Polly apologized too much. For the way Annie counted coins like time. For the way Mary Jane sang to herself behind a closed curtain. You remembered the ones who were forgotten, the ones who warned us, the ones who didn't get footnotes, the ones whose names faded, but whose stories still whispered in the folds. And now, even if the world forgets again, you won't. You are still here, still breathing, still listening. That's enough. It's more than enough. So rest now. Let the gas lamps dim. Let the streets blur. Let the city fall quiet. You are no longer walking those roads. You're lying still, in a room that knows your name, beneath a sky that will not turn away. And somewhere, someone thanks you for listening when no one else did.